Okay, well, I think we should go. Hi everyone, and welcome to, I think it's week 6, isn't it? I think, Nikos, of the virtual cafe running as part of the Advertising Capstone Challenge across Australia in 2020. This week, we're very excited. We've probably got one of Melbourne's hottest strategists, if I can call you that, Pieter-Paul. Pieter-Paul von Weiler from AJF Growth Ops, who used to be known as AJF, but I essentially got bought out, I suppose, or purchased by Growth Ops, which is an innovative company with a number of businesses under the umbrella. So Pieter-Paul has a title of Chief Strategy Officer, is that correct?
Yeah, correct.
So he's leading strategy at AJF Growth Ops, and today he's very kindly agreed to talk about the mighty creative brief. So the session will run for 30 to 40 minutes thereabouts, maybe a bit longer, a bit less. We'll see how we go. After which we'll have some time for questions and Q&A, and students, wherever you are, whatever university you are in Australia, get those questions ready. This is a unique opportunity to tap into PP's mind. So without further ado, PP, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, and good afternoon, everyone. I am going to share some learnings I've had over the years here in Australia, back in the UK, and back in Holland, where I'm original from, on writing creative briefs. And I've titled the presentation The Mighty Creative Brief because it is a very powerful document in marketing. I would argue it's actually the most powerful document that goes around between all of the communication streams and dialogue we have in our industry. This is the one single most important document that goes around. And that's why I've titled it The Mighty Creative Brief. I would like to start with just sharing my thoughts on giving a bit of a definition. What is a brief? And I like to think of the creative brief as a contract that that aligns all the parties involved. And when you work at an agency and when you work on a bigger brief, a lot of people are directly and indirectly involved with the brief writing, the strategy, the sign-off of the brief, ideation of the brief, and even the production of the brief. But in our industry, sometimes the brief is not treated as a contract. By some clients like to change it halfway. And that's quite disastrous, because if you're in the middle of a process, you want to stay the course and you want to continue to build on what you're already doing rather than change it all. So think of a brief as a contract. Once it is set, you shouldn't change it. You can also think of a brief as a bit of a summary. So as a strategist and in our strategy department, we do a whole lot of research. And I know you've been giving a brief on Suzuki, and you all will be doing a whole lot of research to inform that brief. You might look at the category, what is going on there. You might look at customer behavior, how are people behaving. You might look at the cultural context, what is going on in society, what is going on in Australia, how is COVID impacting on all of this. But at some stage, all of those great research and great knowledge and all of these great findings that you have need to be summarized. They need to be summarized, and you need to choose what are the most interesting things that I have found, and summarize it all in a brief and in a proposition that you then hand over, in my case, to a creative mind. And that's what the hourglass is doing here on the page. The sand on the top is all of the different information inputs you have come across, you have uncovered, but you can only hand one piece of sand over to the creatives. It has to be single-minded. It has to be a very clear choice that you make in your brief. A brief needs to do two things. It needs to guide, it needs to provide direction, and it needs to inspire. Those are the only two things that you need your brief to do. Maybe at this point I talk a little bit about, is a creative brief an idea? No, it is not. The idea is what you get out of the brief. But don't shy away of using creative thinking to shape your brief. And that's what I do a lot. Before I actually turned strategist, I did a fair bit of creative thinking and participated in the Dutch equivalent of ad school, and won a fair few times there. And as a strategist, I use creative ideas that I then post-rationalize what would the strategy have been to get to that idea. So it is all right to think creatively, to write your brief, but you shouldn't write your idea in your brief, if that makes sense. And if it doesn't, ask me questions at the end. A brief is not only a summary, but it is the springboard for creatives. It is the starting point of ideation. And I think this man, which is Sir John Haggerty of famous agency BBH in London, said it very eloquently by saying, the brief is the first ad in the campaign. It is my job to make it better. That's what a good brief does. It really inspires creatives. As soon as they see your brief, they start to have ideas in their brain. Now, briefs come in a range of different templates and formats, and almost every agency uses a slightly different template. But when you look at the core of a brief, when you look at the core of every brief, there are some elements that always come back. And today I just want to focus on some basic elements that come back in every brief to help you. And I want to teach you how to write a comm strategy. Every brief implies that you write a comm strategy. And it consists of three very basic elements that I'm sure most of you are very familiar with. The strategy is the where are we going? What are we trying to achieve? Who are we targeting? And what do we need to say? Those are the three elements that every brief needs to nail. How is the job of the creative idea? How is the execution? And that's the difference. So here's a little trick I like to use. This is a brief in a sentence. To get to X, you need to engage Y and communicate Z. If your brief isn't able to answer these three basic questions, your brief is incomplete. So to get to X obviously is your objective. Engaging Y, and you can engage in a whole bunch of different forms. You can do a traditional above the line campaign, you can organize an event, you can invent an object or a new service, as long as you engage people. And Y here clearly is the target. And then you need to communicate Z. What is the actual message? What are we trying to get across? So those are the three elements, and I want to talk you through each element and give you some examples of what I think a good objective, a good target, and a good message looks like. Starting with the objective. Goal setting, I thought in the beginning of my career, was really boring, and I really focused most of my time and energy in writing an interesting proposition. I thought that was the heart of the brief. But the older I've become, the more time I find myself spending and thinking about what is the goal of the brief? What are we trying to achieve? What is the objective that will realize the success? And I found that the more you think about that, and the sharper you define it, the easier it becomes to write the rest of the brief. There are only three types of objectives that every brief should directly or indirectly result in. So you either are investing money, or your brand is either investing money to get more people to buy your product or your brand, which is acquisition, bring more people in. On the right, you see frequency. So we're getting people to buy your product or service more often. So that's mostly applicable to the stuff you buy in supermarkets or from department stores or those types of things. Or on the bottom, you're trying to sell a more expensive product or version of what you're selling. That's a real margin or a profit play. So this feels really dry and boring, and I've stayed away from all of this stuff in the first 10 years of my career. But what I've discovered is, if you get this boring stuff out of the way, senior clients are more open to braver ideas you present to them. So you need to reflect some level of commercial understanding in order to launch more creative ideas. Okay, when you're given a goal, it can be really big and scary and intimidating. And this was a goal I was given in the UK. And I just want to teach you a really simple trick that you can apply to any type of objective you will ever get. Obviously, selling or generating 2.5 billion additional pounds in sales for Sainsbury's, which is the UK equivalent of Coles and Woolies, in 3 years' time is a number that is so big, it's very hard to handle. But what you actually do is break that number down in something you can work with. So if you take the 3 years and you divide it by the sales uplift you need to establish, which is the 2.5 billion, and you divide it again through the amount of weekly shoppers that Sainsbury's had at the time, all of a sudden you get to a number which you can understand. So £1.14 per shopper is something you can imagine what that actually looks like. It looks like probably one product, or maybe one product per two shoppers, per two baskets, rather than thinking about these 2.5 billion additional sales. Say you have a brief on a car manufacturer, and you need to sell 50,000 cars in the next 18 months. Again, I would struggle with that. So break that number down in something more useful. Or say that the car you need to sell is costing $30,000. Now, $30,000 is a lot of money and a bit of a turnoff, especially in times of COVID. Again, break it down in something you can handle. So think about paying that car off in 5 years' time, which equates to 261 weeks or 1,826 days. So all of a sudden, that car doesn't cost $30,000. It costs you $16 a day, which is 4 cups of coffee, which will get you a new car. Make big, scary goals less scary by breaking them down. And that's something you can really use with every objective you will be given. All right, let's talk about different types of objectives. Objectives, so businesses invest in marketing to drive better business results. So acknowledge it. Think about what's the commercial goal we need to achieve, but don't stop there. That's not the objective you want to put into your brief. That's a really boring objective that's not going to excite people. You need to break that down, and you need to think about how do I realize the commercial objective that I've been given? When it comes down to cars, what needs to happen to sell 50,000 cars in 18 months' time? What kind of behavior do does the comms need to realize? Do people need to go to a website? Do I get them to go to an event? Do I get them to go to the dealership? No, because everybody hates going to dealerships. Is there another way of doing this? Do I get them to pick up the phone? Do I break the whole system and get the car to come to them? What is the action you want people to do? Do you want people to download something? Think about tangible actions and think about a step process. But before you actually get people to do something, you need to shift something in their hearts and in their minds. It might be that they don't like the brand. It might be that they ignore your brand and think it's absolutely shit. So you need to make them feel and think differently about your brand. Or you might want to push something they don't know. Something that makes them feel differently about the segment you're selling or the type of product that you're selling. And all of this is interconnected. When you change one thing, the rest changes again. Key bit for me here is break something down until it can't be broken down any further. So don't stick with, we need to make people feel 10% better about the brand. Break that down into really tangible bits of what needs to happen to realize that 10%. All right, I showed you the only three reasons why there are creative briefs for commercial brands. When it comes down to non-for-profit and for government, there's only two goals that sit at the heart of the brief and at the heart of the outcome, which is you either get people to stop doing something, get them to stop smoking, get them to stop drinking, get them to stop from being violent, or get them to start doing something. Be more active, do your taxes on time, etc., etc.
Or get them to stay at home under COVID-19.
Don't get me started. Don't get me started about Melbourne. I'm in Melbourne, guys. I'm in the prison with all of you. I like to think that advertising is actually quite simple, but it's made difficult by people. It is as simple as this. Okay. Questions to ask yourself when writing an objective. What is the role for comms? And I really like that second one. What's the job to be done? And how does the category engage creatively? And how could we challenge this? So look at the category. Look at what the rest of the category or the segment is doing. Try and define some rules that everybody's doing. So if you are a car brand, you need to show that the man is driving the car. You need to shoot the car from the ass angle, as it is called. It is a specific angle that most cars are being shot at. You need to drive down a beautiful road somewhere in Australia. Those are the rules of the category that once you identify them, you can start breaking them and do something completely different. And that's not just about execution, it's also about the goal you set. And I'll give you an example right here. So this is a piece of work for Dare Iced Coffee that we did. And when we started working on Dare Iced Coffee, we looked at the iced coffee category and the wider non-alcoholic ready-to-drink category. And we saw that competitor brands like Icebreak and Oak, they were really trying to own physical strength in their communications. So it was about fast cars. It was about very blokey, strong men. And when you looked at Red Bull and V, it was a lot of adrenaline and physicality coming through. And they were targeting blue collar workers. It was about physical strength with a physical audience. And once we mapped that out, we realized there's a real opportunity here to own something that nobody else owns. All of these brands, not just they're full of caffeine. So when you use your benefit ladder, you quite quickly get to a jolt in physicality and a jolt in mental awareness. But nobody was owning the mental awareness piece. So that became a really clear objective for us. Let's own mental strength when everybody else was owning physical strength. Look at the category, look at what everybody's owning. Is there a place or an opportunity to own something different? All right, so that's the objective section. Let's talk about the target section. This is where you do your research. So you need to find out as much as you can about your target. Look for needs, insights, barrier to purchase, do interviews, don't do focus groups. Focus groups are a bunch of weird people sitting in a weird room being asked weird questions while they eat weird sandwiches and snacks. So don't do focus groups ever in your life. But assignments can be really interesting, right? Draw your favorite car, draw your dream car. What would it look like? What is your relationship with the car? What would life look like if you don't have a car? Those are just some weird assignments you can ask others, and you get some really interesting and weird answers as a reply. And those will give you qualitative clues that you then need to ponder about. What does that mean? If you want, you can then put those clues into a survey and see if it's true for more people. One key trick that we use a lot is talk to experts. So who knows something, who is an expert in a certain subject? Ask them, get their opinion. And of course, there's desk research. Google doesn't mean desk research. Those are two different things. Once you've done all of that, you will have a mountain of findings and insights. And then the hard bit starts. You need to summarize and you need to be choiceful. You need to make strong choices what the most interesting thing is there that links to the objective. And you need to do it in one sentence. And that's the hard bit, right? So in our industry, we like to talk about killing your babies. You've done all of that hard work, and maybe you end up doing some presentation to David or one of your equivalent professors, and you want to impress them with all of your knowledge. When it comes down to the brief, you need to be choiceful. You need to make a really strong choice and summarize it all in one sentence. If it is a brief and a strategy presentation, yeah, show it all off and show the best bits. But in the brief, you have to be really, really choiceful. Otherwise, the brief becomes way too long and unfocused. Something is falling off here. Dramatic effect. This is a campaign we did for the federal government about 5 years ago. And it was very successful. And it was a really hard brief because it was about getting daily smokers to stop smoking. And these were the stubborn bastards that despite all of the great anti-smoking campaigns that that you've had here in Australia, they still were ignoring the message that smoking can actually kill them. And when you talk to these people, when you do your research, as we did, you actually learn that they are very aware that smoking has lots of damaging effects. They're very aware that they have increased chances of getting cancer. They're very aware that it kills them. Then we actually learned that people were not afraid of death. These smokers were saying, well, everybody's going to die and I might as well die doing something I like. It sounds a bit weird, but for them, and I remember interviews with them, they had already agreed with that ending almost. We talked to an expert. We talked to a doctor in palliative care, and we learned about how people suffered and died from smoking-related diseases. And what we learned was quite surprising. We actually learned that the last couple of weeks from somebody who suffers from emphysema actually is quite peaceful. They are in a hospice and they are giving a lot of drugs, but they're not in pain. But what we also learned is the build up to it's the build up to that moment, to those last weeks where the pain happens. It starts with reduced mobility. It leads up to being bed strained. Some people being bed strained for years. Then people struggle with breathing, and some of them end up on ventilators, and they have to fight for every breath. So that was an insight we learned by talking to an expert. And then all of a sudden we had this hunch, right? So these guys are not necessarily afraid of death itself, but what the palliative expert told us is, actually, this sounds horrendous. It's those years that happened before he actually died, where the pain actually lies. And then we started to explore this territory with more interviews about what when you think about your death, what are you most afraid of? And it was revealed that it's people don't want to die in a painful way. People don't want to suffer. That is what they're most afraid of. So lots of learnings there along the way, but we have to be choiceful. And I think the most powerful component of this brief was the insight. And we've tried to cram it here into the target elderly smokers who are more afraid of the pain that comes with death than death itself. And it sounds very simple, but I just want to demonstrate to you that we went on quite a journey. We learned a lot of stuff, but you have to be choiceful and you have to summarize it in a really short and succinct way. And you can. Back to there. So we knew we were going after something mental rather than physical strength. We know we were going after mental strength. And we made an audience choice where the other brands were going after blue-collar workers. We saw an opportunity to go after white-collar workers and people in the cities. And what we learned is people increasingly suffer from lack of concentration. Right? We have so many different devices and bleeps and distractions in our lives that our brains struggle to keep up with it all. So that was the need we briefed in there. Okay, over to the message. Message, most important bit of the brief. It can be called a proposition, the key message, the trigger, the heart of the brief. Whatever the label is, it is the most important bit of your brief. It is the one line, the one sentence that summarizes it all. And I like the definition there at the bottom, the strategic thought that you believe will prompt the target to think and behave in the way you want them to. So first you need to think about what is the way we want them to behave, and then what is the thought that will prompt them to do so. Which isn't easy. Now, this is not my NAN, this is just a general NAN, but you're not writing it for the professors. You're writing it for creatives who are super easily distracted, and you're writing it for your clients. It can go to, some of the briefs I've written go to up to 40 people, right? So it's really important that all those 40 people, when they sign off on the brief, they all take out the same thing. So if you use ambiguous language or ambiguous words that mean different things to different people, I'm already on the back foot with getting that brief signed off by 40 people, which is not an easy feat, by the way. You also want to stay away from marketing ease. So I know professors have a certain way of talking, but also in the industry, there is a specific way of talking. Lots of words being used, lots of different words being used for the same thing. And if you do an exercise with how many different articulations and words are that start with brand equity, brand value, brand awareness, brand consideration, brand equation. It's like there's so much bullshit language. You want to keep it out of the brief. And you want to keep it simple. And it helps being a foreigner, by the way, when you write briefs. Anyway, here's some interesting propositions. So the proposition really need to be that springboard. It needs to really start creative thinking straight away. This is something I wrote in the UK, which was really well received by creative teams. Self-defense for your teeth. Already, those two words, self-defense, are the starting point there. That choice is quite creative and quite directional without being the idea, right? They inspire, they direct without giving the creatives or prescribing the creative what the idea actually is, because they get pissed off, the creatives, with that when you do that. Officeworks, one of our clients, not the most creative execution, but it has been extremely effective. And the proposition for that brief was Officeworks is a tax haven. Almost everything that Officeworks sells can be tax deductible, which has led to a word, everything. And that word, everything, really sticks in the mind. So it's a very effective campaign and a very effective way to drive standout, where everybody else just talks about end of financial year sales, boring, and memorability. And it was also very good for SEO, for search. I'll skip this one. And this was the proposition for Dare. Dare helps people think straight when they're not. You need to read that a couple of times, but when you get it, you really, really get it. So clearly, we're made from real coffee beans. You get a pickup when you drink it there because of the real coffee beans and the caffeine hit. We tap into the need of the target. They're distracted by modern day life, and we try to attach that to our brand. So I thought I'll talk you, I'll give you a whole example of what that one sentence would look like for, or using that one sentence construct. This is the core of every brief, right? Objective, target, message. This is how it all comes together. So have a read while I have a sip of water. We make a really clear choice in the market. We have a clear target audience, and we have a clear need or an insight, if you like. And then we have a very clear proposition that tries to own something in the market that nobody else owns. Just the behind the scenes of Dare and how it actually worked. So we did a lot of desk research. There was this professor, and this is about 2014, 15. And we liked how he thought about the mind in the Western world at the time. The mind is a limited machine that is overstimulated. Okay, cool. That's interesting. So what's the result of that thought? Well, attention is very fragmented nowadays, and we don't have enough attention. We're multi-screening. You might be multi-screening now, doing 2 or 3 things. I hope not, but maybe you probably are. So we're doing too much, and the brain just can't cope with all of that stuff. So what's the problem? Well, mental overload causes increasingly our brains to fade. Okay, cool. So now I have a clear problem that links to my objective of mental strength, the opportunity I see in the market. But then I pushed it further, and I started to think about, if I'm an FMCG brand, I want to own an occasion. That's like a key trick in the world of FMCG. But how do you actually own an occasion? So we started to look into behavioral economics, and there's this model that is very well known from you, and it basically tells you need a certain cue to trigger a routine that then triggers a reward. So David's cue might be at the end of every lecture, I've worked hard. His routine might be giving himself a glass of wine, and that makes him feel a little bit better about himself in his life. Sorry, David, to point you out there. We had 2 out of 3 of these elements. We knew that for dare, we want to own the routine that we want people to associate dare with a real coffee kick, and it delivers a real coffee kick. So that mental uplift we talked about. The higher order benefit of drinking the product is feeling switched on, right? The antidote to attention fragmentation, but we didn't have the cue. And this is where strategic thinking came in. And we thought, okay, when is this applicable? When is this relevant? When should you drink a dare? Or maybe when you're not fully awake, when you're dreaming a bit, when you're not formulating your words right, when somebody's providing vague answers, when you're feeling fuzzy, when you're not considering things as well as you usually do, when you're not showing good judgment, when you make silly mistakes, when you're saying things you shouldn't, when you're not on top of it, when you're having a slow brain. So I started writing this down, and it went on and on and on. And I was like, holy shit, this is quite powerful stuff. I was just playing around. I was just having some fun. And then all of a sudden that led to, oh shit. If I summarize all of these situations, you're basically not thinking straight. Not thinking straight, I was like, bang. That is a very powerful starting point for strategy and as a proposition. Now, not thinking straight clearly can be used any time of the day, in any situation, for any type of profession and any person. So we did some checks that way, and that felt right. So just to give you an idea of what the work looks like, and then I'll end on some brief writing tips. So we played around, and this is where creative thinking takes the proposition and takes it to a level where you as a strategist can't take it to. But the better your proposition, the further the leap from creatives. So we clearly played around with our headlines. We, at the launch of the campaign, I'm not sure if they would allow us to do that anymore, but we literally had a billboard upside down along the highway. We tapped into pop culture. So Eddie McGuire, he dropped the C-bomb on national television, and the next day we had this billboard up. Tony Abbott was being interviewed over the radio, but he didn't realize that there was a live webcam, and a sex line worker gave him a call, and as soon as she said, well, I'm a 58-year-old sex line worker, he winked. So the next day we were in digital display with Don't Think Before You Wink, Tony. This was my idea. So as a strategist, you can have creative ideas, that is fine. So this is us owning misspelled words on Google. We were actually 2 weeks earlier than Snickers when they did it, but they got all the bloody Cannes Lions. And this is bringing the full thinking to life closer to the point of purchase, right? So a real clear creative platform that allowed us to go everywhere. And this is very brave, right? A brand, an FMCG brand that misspells their own name. I'm still surprised they had the balls to do it, but they did it, they didn't announce it. And it was actually quite a discussion in the social channels. And it was one fan telling other fans, you know what? Of course Dare does that, because they're the brand that is about mental uplift and not thinking straight. So over the years, this happened 3 years after we launched the platform. Over the years, people understood what the platform was and associated it without any help with the brand. Okay, almost done. Just some last thoughts. Briefs are like a puzzle, right? When one thing changes, the rest of the brief changes, and you need to look at it holistically. It is not just a tick box you fill in and you start at the top and you end at the bottom. You need to set the direction and stay the course. you need to ignore the noise. There's going to be plenty of noise. There's going to be plenty of distractions. I get carried away with lots of stuff and go down lots of wormholes. Do that, but constantly remind yourself, where am I going? What's the direction? Good briefs are brief. Like I hope I showed you today, you can do it in 3 sentences. But that takes time. Like every word, and I'll come to that in a second, but every word should have a reason to be in that brief. And if that word doesn't have a reason to be in the brief, it shouldn't be in there. All right, but that takes time. You need to write your brief and rewrite it again. Yeah, so you need to sacrifice. You need to sacrifice your babies, cut out words, make it shorter, make it sharper, and keep it single-minded. Coco Chanel says the same thing in a way more elegant way. Before you leave the house, look in the mirror and take one thing off. I like it because that's so out of category, so far away from brief writing, but it's so bloody true for us. And then words. So hopefully with some of the propositions I put on the screen today, hopefully it ignited something in your brain. And if you choose the right words in the brief, and especially in the proposition, it starts a chain reaction of creative thinking. And that's what you need from your brief and especially from your proposition. What is this? Is it a hare? Is it a seagull? Is the hare? Is it a seagull? So you don't want this. You don't want subjectivity in your brief. Avoid it. All right? Because then when you write a specific brief and you have something in your head and you give it to a professor, and he might have a different takeout, that's a problem. So you want to minimize subjectivity. And that is it. Sorry, I went a little bit over, 8 minutes in total, but I think it's over to the floor for questions, isn't it?
Yeah, look, I'd just like to thank you, PP. That's a wonderful presentation, and I think hopefully it's challenged students' idea and understanding of the creative brief. Interestingly enough, I just spent this morning in a sort of a mixed tutorial lecture talking about different templates. So, and I think you've sort of taken away some of the impact of my presentation this morning. But right. And that's great, and that's exciting because what I've leveraged is a lot of historical knowledge on the structure of the brief. And look, I think what you said is some very insightful and some very information, some very strong tips. And so certainly, hopefully, students across all 3 universities are going to take something from this today. Students, do you have any questions? You can speak if you want. You don't actually have to put something in chat. It's up to you.
I've got one.
Yeah, go for it, Meg.
I was just wondering if you had any recommendations, as David said at the beginning of the video, that we're planning a brief for into next year with the assumption that COVID may have normalized itself, but we don't know that. There's no guarantee, there's no certainty. Do you have any suggestions or recommendations about writing a creative brief for a time that has no, there's no guarantee for it, I suppose?
Good question. Focus on what's guaranteed. So this whole COVID thing is affecting us all. And your brief is not going to change, I think. So what is going to be true, that is true now? What can you count? So you're not sure if a state is going to be in lockdown, but what are the things that you can be sure of? Well, economy is pretty screwed. You can be sure of that. What does that mean for a car buyer? But what are the other fixed truths that you can work with? People don't like going to car dealerships. Hey, that's interesting. With COVID, people are increasingly doing everything online. How can I use that as an opportunity? You flip there. So don't be bogged down by everything that's unsure. Focus on everything that is sure. It's a really nasty ninja flip, but does that answer your question?
It does actually. Yes, thank you. It reframes the situation, so I appreciate it. Yeah.
Yeah, reframe it to your own benefit. Yeah. Use it rather than be tied down by it.
Can I ask a question, PP? Sorry, I was on mute. Technology. You talked about, I tell students to be brave. And I always say when we get a client brief in, that the client brief is a discussion paper in a sense, and a place, something to spring off and head off in different directions. And then you must undertake research to validate what you come up with in your creative brief, if that makes any sense. But I guess my question is more around rigidity. So once you have that creative brief, how important is it for the creative team to absolutely stick to it beyond the implementation, the passing on of the creative brief?
Oh God, there's two things there that I want to respond to. Okay, I'll answer your question first. Can everybody see me?
Yeah.
Okay, this is a grid. This is a grid that indicates only 4 possibilities, 4 outcomes that you get from a creative brief. So top left corner, the brief or the idea is on brief and delivers to the outcome that the client needs. That's what you want. Easy, perfect. This grid isn't working, is it? All right, so it's on brief and it does deliver to what the client needs. Right. An idea can be off brief and doesn't deliver what the client needs. So you need to say to the creative, this sucks, start again. Then it becomes a little bit trickier. You can have ideas that are on brief, but don't deliver what the client needs. If that happens, you need to rewrite your brief. Then the brief is wrong. And then the 4th one, which is the trickiest one, the creatives might come up with ideas that are off brief, but do deliver the result that the client needs. Because they're creatives, right? You've got no idea what they're going to come back with if they're good creatives. So, and what you usually get is you get a mix. You get some ideas that are on brief and some ideas that are off brief. But if it delivers what the client needs, you got to present it. And you got to be honest to your client about it. And remember that the brief is not what ends up on a billboard or being made. The brief is just a means to an end. And if the creatives get there another way, you need to respect that. So that's the first thing I want to respond to, David. The other thing I want to respond to is validation. Don't go and research your proposition. That's where everything goes wrong, because we as human beings, we feel first and then we think. We're not very good at thinking, actually. Sorry, professors, but Daniel Kahneman, and he won a Nobel Prize. When it comes down to research, and when you're doing research, maybe for this brief, I would focus on research that powers the insight. When you get a really strong human truth or need or problem, and you can say, I've spoken to 10 people about it, or here's a survey that validates it, you've got a really powerful thing for your client in your brief to say, okay, that's pretty true, but you can still do a little creative loop, a leap with your proposition. You don't want to research your proposition, you want to research the ingredients that led to your proposition. So that might be a powerful thing. Go and research how people buy cars or what the biggest barrier to purchase is, build that into it, and that's a powerful thing to play with, but then still be creative and write an amazing proposition.
Thank you, PP. I'm interested in John's opinion of what you just said about how creatives go off whack, off tack. Because as a former art director, isn't that right, John? So did you used to do that?
Yeah. Well, what I really like from PP is that he's calling us professors.
Yeah, we own it. We own that space.
Yeah, we own that space. But yes, my background is art director, and obviously at different stages, creative director and stuff. So my background is agency creative. And yes, we have experienced that. And PP's exactly right, where we have, fluked a very strong direction for a particular brief, and it wasn't quite on strategy, but going back and looking at it, we were able to adjust the strategy slightly to reinforce the creative, because the creative was right for what the client was really wanting to do, So sometimes it actually does work that way. But also about the brief, the whole thing is that whole thing around the words, and I really like the fact that PP talked about the words in the brief. It's only use the words that you really need to use, and then when you get those words, really think about those words. Really understand what those words are kind of saying to you. So it's a really important area and an important part of the brief. So yeah, thanks, PP. It's a really good presentation.
Maybe just to build on this, in your proposition, no commas, no double dots, no two sentences, short and sweet.
Yeah.
Hey, BP, I have a question. Am I allowed to ask a question, David?
The floor is yours.
To me, one of the most important parts of the brief is the problem definition. If you define the wrong problem, or the problem is too broad or too narrow, you don't come up with the right, you simply don't allow you to have the right creative ideas, right? And you show some examples, or one example of the problem that you defined there. It was really a human problem. The fact that people struggle with having mental strength throughout the day, and a lot of the times when I see a brief like the McDonald's brief that we had last year, we had explicitly stated a business problem, communications problem, and the way they talk about those problems is related to a problem specifically to the brand. So my question is, and the way you presented the problem there wasn't specific to their coffee. It was just a human, a real human problem that we have. We can't just focus all the time, or be focused 100% of the time. So when you are writing a brief, or when you are writing a brief to your clients, do you break it down to what is a business problem, to what is a marketing or what is an advertising problem, versus just there is just one problem and we just solve that specific problem regardless of what that affects my brand, or just is a consumer problem?
You're assuming that there is only one problem. Most of my briefs, there's so many bloody problems. So there are multiple problems. But when it comes down to the brief, I think just focusing on the brief bit, and then we build it out from there, right? In the brief, I think you need to zoom in on one sharply defined problem or opportunity, because you might have problem briefs or you might have opportunity briefs, right? Opportunity for better behavior or to sell more, and problem briefs, oh shit, people are doing the wrong thing, and what is the key to unlock it? But on your journeys, when you're looking at the category, or when you're looking at the history of the brand, or the situation of the brand, you might come across multiple problems. Shit, there's an image problem. People don't like the brand Suzuki that much, or let's stay away from Suzuki. People don't like the brand that much. Or the category might be bloody boring. Like when I first was asked to work on Officeworks, I was like, do I really need to work on stationary stuff? But then when you start to flip it, like, what does stationary actually do? Well, it helps me capture my notes in my notebook, talk to you guys all over Australia via this really boring network cable. But without this thing, I wouldn't be able to talk to you. So there's problems everywhere. In the brief, focus on one problem. Then there's the journey from the client brief to the creative brief. And that's where you're going to encounter, I reckon, many different problems. And write them down. What's the problem with the category? What's the problem with the brand? What's the problem with the product? What's the problem in culture? Nobody's got money to buy a new car. Paying a car off in one go is difficult. Bloody hell, there's problems and opportunities bloody everywhere. Write them down, map them out, but don't put all of them in a brief. Put one thing in a brief. I think I answered that.
Yeah, no, I think you're on the money there, PB. That's really, really interesting. And I just want to add to that. We got what they defined as a creative brief, but really it's a client brief at the beginning of semester. They, Deloitte and Suzuki have a direction in mind, and they're at the very start of the semester when they presented the client briefing, everyone was very happy, and everyone's talking about success and how Suzuki is ahead of their competitors in terms of sales. By the time we got to the Q&A last week, which was 4 weeks into research, I thought everything had changed. And they started talking about a lot of problems. And I thought, wow, I think this is an amazing opportunity for the students because there's shitloads of problems. And what I've said is ultimately those problems are opportunities. And I think so it's really perceptive of what you're saying there. And you're right. What I certainly want my students to do is to leverage one problem. Yeah. And think about that as the opportunity moving forward for their campaign. So that's really interesting comments, PP.
So thinking about, I can't help myself. Now, Adrian, naughty Adrian, giving you the wrong brief. I think Deloitte's done a really interesting job with Suzuki, right? Okay, talking about problems. How many car brands are there in Australia? 50, 60, tons of them. Okay, not everybody can afford a Ferrari and a Porsche. Okay, so wind it down to the brands that are relevant to your target. Then looking at Suzuki and what they've done a really good job in attracting attention, I think, with the last couple of campaigns and marketing investments they've done. But what kind of salience and associations have they built up? It stood out, it was different in the marketplace, but what is still left after all of this COVID wash and not being on air for a long time? What is still left from that? And I don't know what car you need to sell, but is that still relevant? Can you build on that, or can you do something else? Can you do something new? So that's one of the first questions I would ask myself.
That's interesting. So go for it, Renee. No, go for it, please.
Is there a difference when running a creative brief for an advertising campaign compared to an integrated marketing campaign?
No.
Okay, thank you.
That's why I wanted to bring it back to those 3 things, because those 3 things should apply to a digital campaign, an above-the-line campaign, a piece of content, an innovation strategy from Nike. These are the core principles of brief writing, and the brief templates might be different, but what I hope I taught today was core principles that everybody has to go through.
I was just wondering, what is your average turnaround from receiving a client brief and creating a creative brief? Like, how long do you have to do all that research and to find all those insights and then know them well enough that you can put them in that condensed format in a creative brief?
So we have big retained clients. That means they give us a contract and they come back to us rather than call out of the blue and say, we want something on air in a month's time. So with my team, 2 weeks is a good time frame. And within those 2 weeks, because you work on multiple clients,
yeah,
because you've got other stuff in the pipeline, you can work on it 3-ish days, depending on how old you are or how much experience you have in the industry. When it's a pitch, it's different again. With a pitch, and you guys are going to pitch, probably, I think, to a panel. But then you throw everything at it, and you go out and do research, and you need. Here's the tip. Here's how you plan your pitch presentation. Hello, we are team the Meg Amazings. We're team Meg Kellys, and we are amazing. That is your problem right there, and this is why it's happening, right? So you take the mood all the way to doom and gloom, and you make the problem really, really big. Tons of drama. Don't exaggerate, but don't mince it, right? 60 automotive brands in Australia, COVID, nobody's got money. Who needs a new car? Cars are sold with 7-year guarantees. Problem. And then you take it one level deeper and you say, this is why this is your problem. This is why your problem is happening. And then you solve it. This is the solution. And then you end with, and that's why we are the bee's knees, and that's why you have to choose AJC McKellies, and we're much better than the rest. And that is every pitch in every situation. And let's ask the ex-creative director. Do you agree with that? That is every pitch.
John, you're on mute.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Perfect, PP, yeah.
Oh, that sounds like Swindon's going to win the competition.
Well, yeah, that's right. I know, exactly. Easier said than done. But, you know, to PP's point, if you can do it in 4 slides, you know, present the idea, the whole campaign in 4 slides to the client, then, you know you've got a pretty great idea.
And that's the art of reduction again, right? So maybe look at your brief, look at your presentation, and force yourself to take 1 word out. Take 1 slide out, because it will be better.
Yeah, that's right. It will be better.
Look, I'm conscious of time. We're over time, so I'm just going to go a very quick last call for questions. We can take 1 more question. If a student's got an urgent question they must ask PP, then now's the time to do it. No, okay. John and Nicholas, do you have anything to finally ask PP? Otherwise, I'll wrap it up.
No, that's been great. Thanks, David. Thanks, PP.
Okay. Well,
I
look,
also have
PP,
no questions, yeah.
PP, I'd really like to thank you from the bottom of my heart for your presentation today. It's a wonderful presentation on the creative briefer, which is, you know, absolutely an essential part of advertising. And this recording will be made available to students who couldn't make it today. And obviously, because of COVID-19, there's a lot of challenges for everyone, and particularly for students. And that's why we're doing the virtual cafe this semester. Thank you for your time today, and I'll follow this up with an email in due course.
All good. More than welcome.
Thank you.
Very happy to help you. Thanks for the questions.
Thank you, PP. Thank you very much. That was awesome.
Thank you very much.